So thank you so much, Bill, for accepting our invitation. It's a personal honor to have you right now with us at this moment. As you might know, I can present Bill, but I think a lot of us know him. Bill is an international recognized planning consultant, design process facilitator, lecturer, and author in sustainability and regeneration. He is the principal of Regenesis, a regenerative design living systems integrator and indication organization, an author of many technical articles and multiple books, including co-authorship of the seminal work Integrative Design Guide in Green Building. He is the founding board of director of the U.S. Green Building Council and one of the co-founders of the LEED Green Building Rating System. Bill has also consulted on over 200 green design commissions, buildings and city master plans. Wow. So, well, you are one of the most appreciated and known persons in the field of regeneration. What actually made you some years ago, I imagine just some years ago, being so passionate about regeneration and all these topics. Can you talk a little bit about your path regarding this? What made you embark in this journey?
Sure. Well, thank you, Liliana, and thank you all. And I want to tell, it's Ranko, right? Yeah. So I listened to you while I was bicycling this morning, Ranko, and I was very impressed with what you had to say. So it made the ride pleasurable. And I don't want to belabor the story, but regeneration didn't really come onto the radar screen for me until 25 years ago when I met Regenesis. Regenesis was just forming, and they heard me give a speech in Austin, Texas on integrative design systems and processes. And they said, "You're onto something. We think we might be able to, might learn some stuff from us too." So indeed I did learn some stuff. And we're Regenesis, and Regenesis has been working now for 25 years, working on the developmental processes of being and becoming in terms of how we actually become different people. But I will go back to, well, what the heck you asked. When I was 5 years old, I was a zero population growth advocate. And I don't know why, but I was at 5 years old. And at 8 years old, I was questioning my father on how economics could grow forever. So couldn't figure that out. Didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't make sense to me. And when I was in high school, our high school, which is our 10th year, I was given an independent study, and I wrote my independent study thesis was the sociological implications of urban and regional planning. So the point is that from the very beginning, I was interested in the subject, and I didn't know what to practice because there was no practice. So I went to architecture school and planning school, and none of it made sense to me. So I dropped out, and because it didn't make sense. Nobody could answer me. It wasn't until the sustainability movement came along. And so then energy efficiency. So I've been doing this work for 40 years now when I first got turned on to energy efficiency. And then it moved to, well, more whole, green building. And then, well, how do you integrate all these ideas and technical issues? That's integrative systems design. And then the question is, where does one stop integrating? And that's a metaphysical question, you know. And so here we are. So we're exploring who we are as people. We're not fixing a problem. We actually are redeveloping, reconceptualizing who we are as people. Western civilization. But if you follow indigenous thinking and Aboriginal thinking, Maori, Aborigines, First Nations people, and the old wise ones, they know all this already. We've forgotten so much. As one Aborigine points out, sorry, I'm going to launch into a whole different talk than I was going to give it. As one Aborigine pointed out to me, he said, you use 10% of your brain power. What do you think the old people used.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have so much brain power? We've just abandoned so much of it. It's a theory. Okay, that's enough. So, does that answer your question, Liliana?
Yeah, I just wanted to know about your path, so I think we engage on it.
Okay.
You can present whatever you have to us to present it right now. I know you have some topics to share with us, and along the way you do some questions.
Yeah.
And maybe we also engage people from the community. Who knows?
Yeah, so everybody on, I don't know if you can give permission, but right now I'm going to take a risk. Right now, we don't have many people listening, so I would like to take the opportunity to open up the microphones so that when I am speaking and you don't follow me, if I'm speaking too fast, which I do, so please slow me down. I realize you're not all English is a first language, and stop me. Throw a stick in my spokes, as bicyclists say. So let me share my screen.
Okay, you share, please.
Okay. Hopefully this works.
It will work.
Yay, it works. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, very well.
All right. So here we go. Regeneration really is a rebirth, right? And so human development is at the core of this work. And just hold on to that. So I'm going to actually go through in a kind of a linear fashion. It's very difficult to hold a whole in a PowerPoint perspective. But let me see, how do I advance this?
Just have to click on it, I think.
I guess I do. Okay. Maybe.
You have to.
No, sorry.
You have to click on the presentation, actually, not in the screen here.
Well, I would like to see people.
Yeah, you just have to turn it and then go to the other place and divide the screen, I think.
Well, I'll just have to go to. You'll just have to interrupt me. I'll go to the presentation itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did that switch for you? Okay.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite quotes from Gregory Bateson: "The major problems of the world are the result of the difference between the way nature works and the way people think."
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how must our thinking and culture shift? And then what is our role as architects, as builders, as landscape architects, as human beings? Any profession actually has a role in engaging in culture. And by the way, when I'm speaking about how nature works, we are not talking about mimicking nature. We are talking about becoming nature or re-engaging. So Plato, going back a ways, had a way of defining existence, the dimensions of human existence, and the natures of our role. And the whole system of life, as he saw it, had to deal with a unity of three issues: function, being and becoming, and will. And the function is what gets transformed. And that's, within the systems we're working in. So we want to actually, when we are practicing, and I want to say, I don't want to sound, I guess I could sound arrogant here, and I really don't want to, because so many of you are doing such great work. This is the way we have developed this practice. This doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's the best. It's just our experience, and that's what I'm sharing with you. So don't take this as some omniscient viewpoint. It's not at all. So when we look at this, we look at what gets transformed, not what gets accomplished. So we have a lot of transformation to do. And then how we do this depends on our being and who we are becoming. Because if I'm a jerk, and some people may say that I am, but if I'm a jerk, I'm not going to be very effective at engaging others. And those others that we're working with, which is what's necessary to work, we work as communities, right? We will not be effective in the what we need to be doing in transforming the planet to a healthy evolutionary system. So my being is integral to the work that we do with the transformation effort. And the will aspect, that's a little more subtle. But basically, we actually need to be very clear about what is motivating us and what potential we see. Because if we don't see the right potential, we can actually aim in the wrong direction. So function being a will, what, how, and why. Rudolf Steiner talks about hand-hearted mind. These dimensions have been around for a long time, but I'm going to organize the talk in these three arenas. So function. Everything and every being are connected. And all of this works as a whole system. I talked to a Maori elder in New Zealand one time, and he was saying that he said, we believe what he believed, what they believe. And he said, how do you convince the white man? Which I thought was a pretty interesting question to ask to a pasty-faced white guy. And I said, listen, buddy, I'm not here to tell you anything. I'm here to learn from you. So where do you start? And he said, well, we start with the universe. He threw his hands back expansively. And Bucky Fuller says the same thing. You start with the universe. And I said, well, how's that working for you? And he said, well, it's not. I said, good. Maybe we do have something to talk about then, because right now we have forgotten to work with the patterns of the universe. And we actually need to, in Western civilization, we actually need to make a bridge to that. And that's what this talk is about to some degree. So one major principle is life works as a whole system. There are no separate parts or fragments. And I don't think I need to belabor that with this crew, but please stop me if you are having trouble with this. There is no such thing as a sustainable light bulb or sustainable paint or even a sustainable building. There's certainly no such thing as a regenerative building. And the minute you hear somebody saying that, from our perspective, regeneration makes no sense, because regeneration is until buildings can actually have sex and make babies. We're not going to be talking about regeneration. Regeneration is about living systems. So the people in a building now, we can talk about regeneration. The community around it, we can talk about regeneration. But the objects themselves, we cannot. And so, even when the age of reductionism, I'm sure you've heard about that throughout today. If we dissect a frog, it's no longer a frog, and it's lost all its frogginess. So and of course, in natural systems, there is a whole guild of interrelationships that we need to be understanding and engaging in. So this is the first big objective or transformation that we need to go through in Western civilization, is to see things as living and dynamic and continually working and evolving wholes. Nothing is static. The next step is that all things are nested. They're connected. I have cells in my body. It forms a heart. The heart is an organ. The organ supports me as an entity. I support a family. My family supports a neighborhood. The neighborhood supports a watershed or community, and so on. So these are all made up of these holons and holarchy. And people get very confused at this point. Well, which whole do we work with? And one quick way is to understand this is that each smaller whole needs to be adding value to the next larger whole, and that whole needs to be adding value to the next larger whole, and then reciprocal. That larger whole needs to be adding value to this lesser whole, and that happens in a forest or any ecosystem. The trees are functioning with the mycelia, with the mycorrhizal fungi, with worms and animals and habitat and birds and defecation in the woods and all this food and different complementary species. It's a continual gift to each other and to smaller and lesser systems. So no dotted line on the ground. Third one, every living function creates value generating capability in the whole system. I kind of just talked about that, but overall, and you heard about this morning, living systems cooperate. They are not in competition. So this is not about the survival of the fittest, although that does operate, because death is part of life. But there's a symbiosis between all these critters and all the stuff that makes up life. And if we don't understand that, we are going to destroy it, which we're actually rapidly doing. So going back to this diagram, the next principle is that we need to be working in place. And because place is the largest manageable system that we can see. Now, place is going to differ in different places. One of the questions that we ask our clients and our communities that we work with is, how big is here? And here is definitely consistently held by a community. They know when you cross over to there. They know that that further city or town is not part of their particular social ecological system. And so that gives you an idea of the largest place. The reason why place is so important, I don't know if you guys know of Elinor Ostrom's work. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009, I think, on her common pool resource work, which basically said that the tragedy of the commons, if you're familiar with Garrett Hardin's famous essay from the 60s, meaning that we will destroy that which we can't see, or, we'll abuse the oceans, we'll abuse the air, which is exactly what we're doing. And that's the tragedy of the commons is accurate if we think about this at a planetary scale. However, at a place scale, we actually can see the impact of our decisions and respond accordingly. So place is how we are going to save the planet, place by place. The planet is too abstract, but we can save the places we live. By the way, there's I hold this, there's 4,037 cities on the planet larger than 100,000 people. 3.5% is considered the standard tipping point, the 100th monkey, when the whole system begins to shift. So if we take 3.5% of 4,037, that's 141 cities. All we need to do is to actually transform 141 cities to actually engage in a co-evolutionary relationship with the system they're part of, and we will save the planet. Now, there's nothing proving that that's correct, but it's a hopeful indicator.
You think that we have to save the planet, or the planet has to save us, in a sense?
Well, that's right. But the planet won't save us if we keep abusing it, right? So the flip side, is that what you mean, Liliana?
In it, in a way that we really have to learn with it. So in a way, we are just actors, but also, of course, we are protagonists. But we have to embody the energy of the planet and let the planet, in a way, help us to be better and to co-create with it. That's what I believe.
And that's why place is so important, though, because you can actually understand place and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do in our practice is we call it a story of place, and we help the community and the system understand their place. And what happens is people fall in love with life again. And then there's the beginning of this relationship of then mutual caring. Does that make sense? So this is a pretty important point. I just want to pause on that. Does that hold water for people?
You can comment. Just since we have here, at least, you can comment what Bill is saying. Just let people comment. I don't know.
Okay. No comment. Don't hesitate, though, to step in.
Yeah, put the comments, even if I cannot speak. The ones.
Yeah. And I can't see the comments because I'm advancing the PowerPoint. I can't see the comments.
Don't worry. If we see comments, we'll let you know. Okay.
Super. Okay. So I want to make this real now. So that's kind of abstract. Those are abstract principles. So let's make this real. I've got a couple stories I want to share with people. So the Brattleboro Food Co-op, this is a project we did in the early 2000s. And this is a grocery store in the state of Vermont in the United States. And they called us up. They wanted to do a LEED Gold grocery store. And the first question I asked the client is, do you want LEED or do you want sustainability? Because there's a difference. And she was very bright. She said, well, we want both. We want the certification and we want to do what's required for sustainability. So that was a good client. So the first thing we did is we said, well, we have a grocery store here. Where does our food come from? And the average bite of food in the United States travels 3,600 miles. I don't know, was that 5,000 kilometers? And so that we did about 5 minutes of research and realized that all the energy that we could save in this building with efficient refrigeration cases and light bulbs and non-toxic paints and stormwater management, all the kind of credits that you get in LEED and any green building rating system, would pale in comparison to the food system. So the first time we went into the grocery store, we took a tour of the store with the executive committee, and the first bin that we came to in the produce section was the apple bin, and the apples, it turned out, were from New Zealand. So there we go. There was 12,000 miles of travel with those apples. And we found strawberries from California and blueberries from Chile. So you get an idea that incredible amount of energy being used to transport our food. So they also said, so I basically asked them, I said, what happens if there's a truckers strike? How long will you be in business? And they said, well, we're out of business in 3 days. And the executive director said, yes, and if a big supermarket chain, grocery store chain comes into town, we're probably out of business in a year because we can't compete with prices with those larger chains. So what's the one thing that a grocery store chain can't compete with, or a truckers strike? And that's local food. So this is the operating diagram for the store. And the first thing we looked at is, well, how many farms were around there? All those green splotches, light and dark green splotches, were former farms or ranches. And they were all out of business except for 2. No longer, and this was just over a span of 40 years that they'd gone out of business. The best soil was in downtown Brattleboro, in that small circle in the center. And people said, well, we built on it. Well, you've only built on 35% of it. And most towns fed themselves from backyards during World War II, the Victory Gardens, they were called here in the States. And so why don't we grow our own food here? Because the soil in the larger outskirts is damaged and frankly denutrified from multiple series over hundreds of years of bad farming, bad lumbering, and bad grazing practices. So this grocery store, the brief or the program for this grocery store turned out to be a place to house an agricultural and soil extension service to teach people how to grow food again in their backyards. And then a cannery, a canning place where they could can their food, and a daycare center to take care of the kids while the parents were doing that canning work or working in their gardens, and an abattoir for hunters to dress their meat because it's a big hunting area up here, and a forest service extension service to begin to work on healing this soil in this ecosystem so that farmers could come back, and a credit union to actually support farmers and smallhold farmers to come back and begin to manage this ecosystem. And and a credit union to loan money to the farmers, and then a grocery store. By the way, a grocery store. Well, the executive committee was so excited about this, they had us rush to do a presentation to the board of directors, and we didn't do a very good job. In fact, it was a pretty bad job. And one of the board members said, all we wanted was a grocery store. What is all this BS? And we were fired that night. So we had to write a report. We wrote a long report, and the board of directors studied that report for a year. And we got a call almost a year to the date later on, where the board president said, we want to apologize to you, Bill. This is the best thing that's ever happened to us. The building wasn't as important as we thought. Now, they did build this building later on. But what he said is that we realize that we, through this work, are an acupuncture point to continually regenerate the system. And what happened is they designed a 100-year ends, we call it an ends policy, an end state policy, that this was almost 20 years ago. And I found out just a couple months ago, I was giving a conference, and a woman was from Brattleboro, and she said, yep, we're working it. We're moving ahead. So the point of this story is that what we left them with is the capacity and capability to co-evolve and improve their system over time, to continually regenerate their relationship with it. And the one reason I mentioned the story that we were fired and the way we had to give, because they didn't understand what we were doing, and we wrote this report, is that it takes about a year for the synapses, the myelination in the brain, to actually begin to shift when you're presented with a new paradigm. Change doesn't happen overnight. And so when you're involved with regeneration, you are in it for the long game, folks. It takes a year at a minimum, and it takes 1 year to begin to change, and 3 to 5 years at the pace of community planning for change to be permanent. So it's a really important point. So when we come in and we have a change management weekend, right, or a transformation weekend, you're wasting your money. You might consider it as an invitation, but it needs to be an invitation to a much longer lasting engagement, which is a form of a practice. And I'm going to come back to this over and over again, but life is a practice. And just like meditation is a practice, just like exercise is a practice, just like learning a language is a practice, it takes time. And so for us to engage in this even sustainability movement, not to mention regeneration, but certainly regeneration, we need to practice what it means to regenerate. I want to pause for the minute there. Is that all making sense to people? Okay. Absence of comment means you're agreeing.
No, we have some comments here from chat.
Okay, great.
Yes, Plex makes me think of acting local and thinking global acts also, the importance of creating local communities.
Yep.
There's some comment here that I totally agree with you. Sharon also says absolutely agree.
Yeah, I just flipped to the screen. I can see it now. I can see the comment.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's and I'm not looking necessarily for a compliment here. I just want to make sure that we are communicating. And so the point about place, acting local and thinking global, of course, we do need to get, it's not an either or, right? We have this global economy now, and we've created incredible disruptions because of it. And we've destroyed local economies because of it. We do need to have an economy of place. That I am convinced about. But you never have all the resources you need in a place. So there's always a global economy. It's just that we have this tendency for the pendulum to swing in Western culture. So, the middle way is what we actually need to be conscious of.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let me go back to it's really weird that I can't shift it from here.
Yeah, I have to shift it from your place while you're sharing.
All right. So the word potential is another core principle. So we have a few core principles: working with whole, working with nested systems, that everything in life is connected and evolving, and that that we work with potential. So we've seen from COVID, there's a before COVID and there's an after COVID picture of Beijing. And of course, the Venetian canals, you can actually, for a while anyway, you could actually see to the bottom of them. Not that they were necessarily non-polluted, but they were certainly reduced sediment. So the problem so we make a very strong point about avoiding problem solving, because when you solve one problem, you end up with 4 or 5 new problems. So nature doesn't work with problems. Nature, if you can anthropomorphize nature is always looking ahead. It's always looking to the potential that exists in the system. How do we recover its efficacy, its communication, its relationships? Those add to dynamic stability and dynamic dynamic stability, where you have multiple species, multiple actions, multiple relationships buffering each other in times of destabilization. So the prairies in the United States, for instance, they can suffer drought, fire, locust infection, pestilence, buffalo stampedes, sandstorms, yet there's always elements of that prairie that bring it back. So that's what I mean by dynamic stability. But when we work with problems, they may eliminate what we do not want, but it does not help us focus on what we do want. So climate change. Let's take climate change. It's the big
Big
gorilla in the room. And let's say that we solve climate change. That we have, I was reading about the mineral, I think it's Olivier, it's called. Am I right about that? Or anyway, that could potentially suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere. Let's say that we solve climate change. Have we actually solved our problems with the planet? That's a rhetorical question, because there's so many other things that so many other ways we're damaging life, right? Species reduction, plastics in the ocean, water habitat destruction, nutrients in water streams, etc. And certainly relationships with each other is nothing to write home about. So what do we want? And if we can actually describe what we want, that actually will help us live there. But we actually live in the world of what we don't want, and we fight about whose negative want, whose problem is more important than the others. Does that sound familiar to people? So how do we work with potential? So just a little more reinforcement. There's a stream in Baltimore, Maryland, that a civil engineer had to design because he had to get rid of total suspended solids, which created multiple more problems. No more fish, no gravel for the fish to lay eggs, and if there were fish, overheating water because the riparian corridor trees and foliage were cut down. All the debris that catches up that the fish would have eaten now stays there, and they have to have mechanical equipment to move in. Pretty ugly. But once we actually were allowed to work upstream and slow down the water with good stormwater management, this is what the stream was able to return into in 3 years. So that's a 3-year difference.
Wow.
So it's nature, what's that?
It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's actually a long term. What we have found, I'm going to make another bold premise here. What we have found in our work, and I think any permaculturist out there knows this, and I'd appreciate hearing some alternative thoughts, is that you can see when you align yourself with the way nature wants to work, it begins to heal itself noticeably within 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to say we can save the world in 18 months if we actually get ourselves in alignment with the way nature wants to work. That's how easy this could be. The Los Plateau in China, 18 months from when they finally figured out how the farmers actually wanted to work. It went from a desert to that green. So life is about potential. It evolves, it renews, it develops. Develops is another word for evolution, by the way. And as Maturana says, and Aeneas Nan says, life is a process of becoming. Life runs up. It actually wants to engage in new relationships and mutually supportive relationships, unlike humans. But we can learn a lot from that. And of course, we can develop too, if we choose to. And of course, is what we talk about with our children, right? Our children we develop our children. Well, maybe we need to be developing each other too, along with this. And that's what gets up to this idea of how we actually use regeneration as a process to work not only with what's out there, but what's in us as well. So life is a process of being and becoming. It's not static. You know, we have a tendency in our culture to want to kind of fix things in place. That's totally wrong. We don't want to create impenetrable concrete. We want to actually work with the fluidity of life. As E.O. Wilson says, better amuck than regimented. It's a pretty good principle to live by. So how do we keep up with this change? How do we co-evolve? How do we engage with co-evolution? And what mental models do we hold that may prevent us from doing so? That's a big question. Because as a culture, that final question is actually what we are hopefully, in a positive way, creating new mental models to replace with the people we work with. So a simple example, and maybe we can actually talk about this out loud. I want you to just pause for a minute and think of a few projects in your experience. I don't know how many architects we have here, landscape architects and sustainability consultants, but even if you're not any of those, anything with a beginning and a middle and an end is a project. It could be a dinner party. It could be making dinner for your family. That's a project. Has a beginning, has a middle, has an end. So think of a few projects that required working with teams. A couple that were fulfilling, a couple that were agonizing. Let's just get them in your head for a second. Just take 30 seconds. Okay. Do you have some in your mind? Well, I'm sure we all have agonizing projects in our mind, don't we? But I hope in your life you have some positive ones. Now, what I'd love to do is maybe take a minute or two. I'd like you to image the design process with those projects. And if it's not design, it's management process or organizational process with these projects. What are the core issues that made the difference between the agonizing and the fulfilling projects? Take a minute, please. Write them down. All right. So let's call them out. I'm curious. I'm going to take notes. What were some of the core issues that made the difference?
Do you want us to chime in, Bill?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I could say something as a landscape architect. I fortunately don't recall that many agonizing projects that I was involved in, but I would definitely
I want to work with you.
Yeah, well, I was probably lucky, or I haven't been working too much. So I definitely, I think the ones that I was least pleased with being a part of were the checklist works. So where you have a full form that tells you exactly what you're expected to do, and you can't deviate from that. Yeah. So that was probably that's the worst kind of work. The most fulfilling would be the best experiences I've had with teamwork, where there was respect, where I could actually feel that I was part of a process that was greater than my own work. But I could also note that I have a lack of an important experience from what I've been hearing you talk about, because I have never been involved in a project that was deeply engaged with the community. I've always worked in that kind of office setting where you may have a great team, a multidisciplinary team, but it's always the team making a project for some place, but not necessarily engaging with the place, with the community. So we try to gather the best of our scientific and creative potentials, but it's always something that is done for a place, not in the place or with the place.
Yeah, you're building a building on the place, not within the place. Yeah, and I see some comments here. I see communication. Thank you, Luis. Communication or lack of it. Listening to the market or not. Having fun and joy. That's a good one. Some challenges. Time for project hierarchy. I don't know what expectations meant there, Joey. Some challenges. Time for project. Values. Okay. All right. Any others? Anybody want to drop in here?
I can say that people can ask for doing the MIC thing, or if you're not able to, I think you're going to have like accept Sharon. We hope it works. We are testing this.
Yep.
So, Sharon?
And fairly quick comments, folks. Hi, Sharon.
Hi, Bill. Thanks very much. Well, my question, my experience with the projects that worked out is when there's some kind of a common synergy in the way of thinking, or some kind of a passion or human element, emotion that unites us, towards getting something done, and that kind of common purpose. Because I think that makes it so much easier. And makes the communication flow. So there's something beyond the individual, I guess the most agonizing projects I've had were where, I used to work in this kind of hierarchical corporate models where they would just ask you to do things. You're part of a project. You don't kind of see where you fit in or what the result of your work is going to be. And then you kind of then get your line manager taking credit for your work because he then presents it to his line manager. Like those kind of horrible experiences I had personally, I felt was one of the reasons I broke out and deinstitutionalized myself. That was my experience is human projects that, now in this regenerative space, I feel a lot of wonderful things are appearing through these synergetic things that you talked about.
Yep, indeed. Okay, I'm going to cut you off there, Sharam.
Yes.
How is it? Sharam?
Yes, Sharam.
Great, thanks, Sharam. So I see those are great comments, and I see a lot in the comment chat room. So I see communication, teamwork, respect, being held compressed by a checklist, purpose, greater a process in service of something greater, values, dynamic harmonization, only to earn money. Yeah, basically money focused, love. These are pretty good. So these are great, actually. And we filled up the room with these things, with groups, and especially to architects. And I call myself a recovering architect. I like to say, now, what's not during these green building during the green building years when we were trying to define green building? What's not on this list that you would expect to see? And the answer was technology. Technology never appears, and money has only appeared 3 times in 15 years as being an issue. So what it says to me is that the important stuff for creating meaningful and beneficial work happens from a being state, not a technology state. And yet, how little time we spend working with that, with our teams and with our clients. N'est-ce pas? Okay. So onward. Oh, I wanted to come back to this, because what Shrem said, that it does depend on how one is working and how one adds value and sees them adding value in relationship to these larger systems. I think you were kind of speaking to that, Shrem, I believe. Okay. Hope you don't mind me being so casual here, folks.
Yeah, loving it.
Okay, good. So I just read this quote. I highly recommend. In fact, I'm going to come out on a limb. One of my guys in, I don't know if you can see me. I'm going to come back. Hang on a second. I think you can throw away every sustainability and regeneration book in your library for the last 30 years, and all you need to do is read this book. And that's called Sand Talk by Tyson Yunkaporta. So he's a mulatto Aboriginal thinker, PhD. So he comes from both worlds, and his translation, his ability to transform and transfer what we are all talking about at the core of regeneration is so elegant. So I recommend it. Back to the reason I brought that up is because this is a quote from the book that I happen to love. The most destructive idea in existence is, I am greater than you, you are less than me. This is the source of all human misery. Then the next page he goes on to say, all law breaking, because this is a law, all law breaking comes from that first evil thought, that original sin of placing yourself above the land or above other people. So I'm sure we can all imagine how that would create a greater world. But this is not just saying the golden rule. It is the golden rule, basically. But this puts it in starker contrast because our egos continually are destroying the planet. And as Kathia Laszlo says, Irving Laszlo's daughter-in-law, former daughter-in-law, sustainability is an inside job. Now, what do we do with that? You know, we can talk about that. I saw that, what is his, Giles Hutchins? I think that's his name, right? You had him on this morning. Is that right, Liliana?
The Giles Hutchins, yes.
Yes. Had a really nice article on Facebook on being and becoming. So the question is how do we actually make that practicable in our projects and not just something that seems like a good idea?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to get to that in a minute. The reason I brought this diagram, I know many of you know this, is that you all know this diagram, right? Do I need to explain this diagram to anybody? And I'm happy to do that if you would like it to. But okay, I'm not going to explain it, but I am going to make a couple points from it.
Yeah.
Is that restoration and regeneration are two different things. And I think the people that I heard speaking today, I believe, understand that, but so many people don't. Regeneration is not a synonym for restoration. Mm-hmm. Restoration, let me give you the definition of restoration. Restoration means that by the way, can you restore an ecosystem? It's a trick question, folks, but
yeah. We talk about restoring like mining places and becoming like landscapes, live landscapes, but actually we talk about that thing, restoring the place in that way.
Yeah.
I think if you consider an ecosystem as a dynamic thing, as something that's continuously evolving, you cannot restore it because there is not a final state.
That is the right answer. I'm going to make that very plain. Is that you can never restore anything.
Sorry to cut. Actually, just to interrupt. To say that Dalai Lama, I think, said a very good thing. He said one of the most important things human beings can often do is to do nothing.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a powerful statement because if you just leave things, maybe they will just restore.
Well, that's really interesting. I think we need to talk about that. And in fact, I think I've got some slides in here that will speak to that. If not, please, whoever said that, please, because I can't see you, please raise that one again, the Dalai Lama's statement, in a little bit if I don't speak to it. The humans have a role to play. But let me get back to the idea of restoration. Restoration means that we are restoring an ecological subsystem, like a wetland or a small chunk of forest or a beach dune system. We are restoring an ecological subsystem so that it has the self-organizing capabilities to evolve. Everybody get that? That makes sense to people? We're not restoring something literally to its original condition, because there is no original condition. It's always evolving. But what we are is giving it the capability to self-organize and evolve.
So it's like you can actually restore habitat so that certain species can come back and populate a certain place.
Yep, and then you let it alone. Then the Dalai Lama is right. But if what we've destroyed, we can also help reconstruct. Now, regeneration means a continual process of rebirth, meaning that regeneration, that RE is very important, is that it's just not done once. That would be generating. What we need to be doing is regenerating, which means coming back, let's say on a cycle of a year, which is pretty standard. Every year we come back and we say, well, how did we do? Is that system, did we actually help that system, or did we harm it? What might go wrong? So our observations are very important, and our engagement is very important, because humans have a role in life. And in fact, the healthiest ecosystems on the planet have been when humans are engaged, not when they're removed. That has been a very controversial statement to make until recently. Now we know from evidence from all over the world that that's true, but in a much different way than the typical Western society works. So another thing about regeneration means is a synonym. It was a term that came out of the Church of England in 400 years ago, and it was a synonym for the word repentance. Now that is another interesting word. If you look at the root of repentance, it's repenser or repenser, right? To rethink, to remind. It doesn't mean to stop sinning, although that would be a good idea. What it does mean is to rethink, put on a new mind so that you don't keep screwing up. So regeneration comes from that root of rethinking, reminding, rebecoming. All right, that was a little pedagogical sidebar, pedantic sidebar. So another aspect of, we talked about this a little bit, is that relationships are reciprocal in nature. It's a mutual process, continual process of exchange and mutual support. And humans can be and should be, and certainly need to be, part of that now. So becoming conscious of our thinking and being is a practice. There's the functional, elemental mind, and there's the holistic and relational mind. And both are important. We do have to stop degenerating the planet. We also have to begin engaging in regenerating. You can't do one without the other. If we keep dumping CO2 into the atmosphere, it's not going to help. All the regeneration is not going to work. So we have to stop the damage as well as regenerate our relationships. So Wendell Berry asks the question, what are people for? What is the role of humans on this planet? As this is a typical Buckminster Fuller quote. Man seems unique. Man also certainly includes women, seem unique as the comprehensive comprehender and coordinator of local universe affairs. He's talking about place, by the way, local universe. The comprehensive comprehender, meaning that we can see an awful lot of what's going on, and we can coordinate things. We can coordinate stuff. We are, as others have observed, we are the consciousness of the planet. We are not the unconsciousness, I might add, although that's the way we've been acting. So how do we become conscious again? And this is a really important quote about human role from Kat Anderson's book, Tending the Wild. California native peoples believe that when humans are gone from an area long enough, they lose the practical knowledge about correct interaction, and the plants and animals retreat spiritually from the earth or hide from humans. When intimate interaction ceases, the continuity of knowledge passed down through generations is broken, and the land becomes wilderness. Now, I could go on. Let me see if I have this. No, I don't have any stories here. But basically, native people, the state, 90% of the state of California was a managed ecosystem by the Miwok people. So it wasn't letting it alone. They were actually co-creating and creating much more. And when those peoples worked with the system, there were many more species. And what many more species mean when you have many more species in relationship, you have that dynamic stability that we need as humans and that life needs to continually develop in the face of the pressures and perturbations that happen in life. Okay. Now, when we work and when Regenesis works with a client, we are working on what we call 3 lines of work. What needs to evolve in the way we live and engage in this place? So think about the Brattleboro Co-op example. We needed to actually engage the land again in a way that actually produced healthier relationships in the soil and the trees and allowed people to produce food, reciprocal relationship. What needs to evolve in the ways we work together? Well, how does the co-op, let's go back to that example, how do we actually work as a collaborative, not only to work in producing food for ourselves, but also restoring, regenerating that ecosystem. And by the way, one of the outcomes of the co-op, go back to that story, was that they began to support other co-ops and teach them how to work that way. So that expanded the work massively. And of course, what was fundamental was, how do I evolve? What is my role as an individual? How do I participate? Do I understand that actually I need to change and work differently to be able to work effectively with other people? And we don't need to actually belabor that with folks. But what we do in our practice is ask people to be reflective, to self-observe, to observe themselves in action, to actually remember when they actually created a friction or a schism, and that we all become what we call friends in the work, that we help each other work on our own evolution. Now you think, well, that's pretty noble and perhaps not going to happen in real life, but in fact it does. And the reason it happens in real life is because when we work on potential, the largest health of the system, it actually draws people together. And that's the magic of place. So we have all the technologies and the knowledge we need to sustain and heal the planet. What's preventing us from doing so? I'm going to throw that to you. I want to hear some answers to that. What's preventing us from using all these technologies and knowledge?
It's ourselves in the way of not seeing the potential of it, actually we could become even more with it. So I don't think we really look to the value of things the way that they really value. That's why I think we don't engage so much.
Mm-hmm. There is that lack of trust.
Do we actually know how to use it? I'm sorry.
Do we actually? Well, that's another thing. We really need new understanding, don't we, Luis?
That was my question. Do we know how to use them? Because we developed these technologies. Probably each one was developed to care for a specific problem, and I think we all agree here that there are no isolated problems. So
right.
How do we use these technologies to
Good. I'm going to talk about that.
The whole.
So beneath that, so I would call that understanding. We need understanding. But to get understanding, we have to have something else. And I'll take away the suspense. I'm sure you're all suspended, is will. That we actually don't believe, number one, we don't believe we can do it. We aren't drawn to believe we can do it. Most of us are worried about dying from, and killing off the species and killing off the planet. We're actually operating from fear. We aren't operating from potential. And so we are frozen. That makes sense to people? So let me explain to you what I believe to be the most significant thinking. And this is a 4,000-year-old framework. It's called the Law of Three. It may be 6,000 years old. And all life, I'm going to go back to this so I can see, all life can be seen as an activating force and a restraining force or a receiving force. So you want to build a building, stuff gets in the way. gravity is a restraining force. Money, NIMBYism, not in my backyard, by community members, could be multiple things, the typical climate. But somehow we do one of two things. We compromise, which means to concede, conceder, and so lose. I'll give up a little if you give up a little. And so what we do, I want to build a shopping mall. Well, there's a wetland here. Well, we'll only take half the wetland. So what happens? We've destroyed half of the wetland, which is vital for our survival, and the shopping mall gets reduced in size a little bit, so the developer loses a little money. Now, I'm not suggesting those are an equal trade, but typically what happens in politics, the Democrats give up something, the Republicans give up something, and you end up with a piece of garbage. And 3 years later, people say, well, why did I give that up? That was such a great idea, but we had to compromise. So compromise, just like, you've heard the term for sustainability. Sustainability is a slower way to die. You've heard that expression. So if all we're doing is reducing the damage, it's actually not enough. We have to actually be working with potential. Compromise is the same way. You compromise here, and then you compromise again, and then you compromise again, and then you compromise again. And where do we find ourselves? In the place we are right now on the planet. So compromise needs to be excised from our language. I'm serious. It is death. Compromise is death. Now, people will say, well, we have to learn how to compromise or we won't get along with each other. No, there's actually another way. Nature harmonizes. Nature does not compromise. The willow tree does not negotiate with the oak tree about sharing nutrients. You really made me mad last week, oak tree, so I'm going to pull back some nutrients from you because, I don't like you very much. You can't imagine nature doing that. And we have to grow up as people. Now, when we show this slide to potential clients, and mostly developers are our clients, they say, wow, if you can harmonize all the conflict we have in our community, that is worth 15 years worth of lawyers. And so let me share with you a project. By the way, there are no problems in nature, only potential. Nature doesn't ask questions. It only assumes, goes forward. So this is a project in Viña del Mar, Chile, 19 hectares of an oil tank farm, very polluted. And the developer is a very wealthy corporation, and they wanted to give a gift to the city, which was a gift was 1.5 million, what was it? No, 450,000 square meters of a mixed-use project. And there were 25 activists in the town who said, we don't want that. Developers have destroyed the city. They put up all these big buildings you can see in the distance. Viña del Mar was one of the great garden cities of the world. They borrowed the English garden city tradition in the late 1800s. And this was a city that looked like this. Quite a beautiful place. But it no longer looks like this. It looks like this. You see the trees are denuded, the buildings destroyed, the bay, Valparaiso Bay, is a dead zone, and the estuary, which provides the seed stock for the bay, has literally been made into a parking lot. By the way, that's the estuary right there. So the client invited us down and said, we don't believe you that you can harmonize this, but if you can't, we'll give you 2 months to prove to us what you can do. And we said, well, sure, we'll take that challenge. So this is the site. And here, in quotation marks, went out about 20 kilometers out into the farmland. There's the estuary, by the way. And I'm pointing that out for a reason. I'll tell you in a minute. So basically, this town was still is one of the great vacation spots in southern South America. And yet it's dying. And it's been dying for the last 30 to 40 years. So in fact, what we do when we go into a city, we look for the patterns of life. And one of the patterns that we observe, which is very powerful, is the former Indian population, the Aconcagua, the Inca, the Bada, the Spanish, the British, the railroads, the industrialists, the Garden City movement. Every time humans had a big shift, it actually healed the ecosystem, created a more healthy ecosystem as well as a social system, although I don't think the Aconcagua and the Bada native peoples would agree with that. But nonetheless, it was a more healthy and dynamic system until 30 years ago, think most of us know what happened then with the Pinochet era. And you can see that the Garden City started plummeting. And soon after that, the tourism started plummeting. Universities are the only thing that kept up. And so the pattern that we observe there, because what we're trying to do is help engage the community around the potential of their place, is that they actually knew how to compound resilience. They knew how to innovate succession. And we met with them and we said, you want to actually create a healthy city, right? So why are you fighting against a developer? I'm not saying we didn't necessarily say that we agreed with the development or not. What we were asked to do is to harmonize everybody. And that included the developer. Oh, so by the way, the first 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, we went from negative to mostly enthusiastic or supportive from the 17 of the first activist groups we met with. Because what we did is we said, let's work together on the health of the whole city. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, well, we'll help you do that. And then we can actually work with the developer to help that development work in support of the health of the city. They said, well, that sounds like a pretty good opportunity. We don't believe you, but we'll give it a shot. The developer, we had to actually stop a transactional relationship. And I think many of you can relate to this or know of developers that do this. So here's the development, Las Salinas. And they were going to give this neighborhood a school, and this neighborhood a park, and this neighborhood access to the community center, that kind of thing. So you're trading, right? And basically that's a way to compromise. We'll give you don't want the development as it is, but we'll give you a little something, we'll buy you off. Does that sound familiar to everybody? Transactional relationship. What we were explaining to them is let's work the way nature works, a dance of reciprocity, a dance of mutual benefit and greater potential. So the developer, we actually convinced to be an equal stakeholder, no more important, no less than important, than every other stakeholder in the city. And this is a figurative diagram, it's not literal. And what we were all working on was the health of the potential for the place. Now, what happened is that through meetings every 6 weeks over the course of a year, people got more and more excited. Now, I'll give you one story, is that the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, and I see I only have a few more minutes left, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce did not want to work with us. He said, we don't need to talk to a couple of gringos from the States. We know how it works here. See you later. Well, 10 months into this process, he called up our client. He said, Ricardo, I don't know what you guys are doing, but count us in. This is the first time the city's been able to dream in 30 years. And the mayor didn't want to speak with us either. And she actually commanded her staff not to work with us. A year later, she called up and said, we see what you guys are doing. It is really important. We want to participate. So the point of this is that when you work, I'm going to go back to seeing faces. When you work with this large a system, you can actually get people who are actually guarding their own territory about habitat connectivity, or we're working with water health, and we're working with mobility, and we're working with racial harmony, and that's our job, and we want to fix it. It doesn't work that way. You have to actually work as a whole system. So if you can create potential for this larger system that everybody says, yes, that's what we want, that brings all these different stakeholders to work together in service of that potential. And then what happens is, on the 10th month, that people start saying, yeah, we can actually work with you instead of fight for money. We can actually share money. We can actually share resources. We can actually make this so much more effective. And so the problems get solved, but they get solved in the context of the health of the whole. So you start with the whole, and then you address the problems. That's a really important principle, folks. And it actually makes all the difference. And by the way, what I'm giving you are really simple principles, and I'm trying to give you examples that actually work this way. Are these landing? I mean, can you see these being operationalized? Or is it just more words?
I was trying actually to see how it could actually work in that sense of gathering the whole of it it's not easy because we are still so much used to the frame of being so divided and seeing things from the particular to the general, not the general from the particularly.
That's right, and
So,
that has to stop. And the one way to do that is to say, we all love this city we're in, or we all love this bioregion. What's the potential for this bioregion? Now, how do we serve that? And that's what I mean but by helping people see those patterns, this is what I mean by helping people fall in love with life again. They actually have a way, something to focus on that's meaningful. We've never seen it fail, by the way. Not saying it's perfect, but we've never seen it fail. All right, back to this. So basically what we're doing is talking about building a field. And a field is, instead of a checklist, check, 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 we're building a, here's a field. It sounds woo-woo to a lot of people. I'm sure you've all been in offices where you've walked into a conference room where there's been a really divisive fight. And you open the door, and what do you feel? Feels pretty bad, right? You can feel that energy, and you say, I would rather go to a dentist. I got a dentist appointment to go to. So the same thing if you're walking along a street and you see a really fun party happening, if you're a party person, you say, whoa, I'd like to go to that party. And that's a field of attraction. That's an energy field. And basically what you do is in a community, if you can get 50 or 60 people working together in service of this larger system, you will start attracting other people because no one else is working that way. All right. Let's keep going here. So regeneration is a continual practice. A continual practice is needed to sustain and evolve sustainability. What does this require of us? Oh, by the way, this developer here in New York City, this is New Rochelle, New York, they got approval. I'm not suggesting this is ecologically healthy, but from a community standpoint, they got 27 projects approved in a year because what they do is they work with the community for 2 years before they even think about proposing a project. That again is working kind of with the idea of potential. So this is human nature. If you can actually engage people around potential, you will find powerful partners. I want to make sure that we understand the difference between generative and regenerative. Buildings are generative. The bulldozer, for instance, can be destructive. It could be degenerative. It could be generative in creating, platforms for building buildings on, or it could be regenerative by recreating waterways that may have been destroyed. So nothing is regenerative or degenerative in itself. It's what it offers. So, but the most a tool can be, like a bulldozer, a building, or a light bulb, is generative. A photovoltaic panel is generative. To be regenerative requires us to rebirth relationships, and that requires consciousness and human engagement, and all living entity engagement. Evolutionary health just doesn't happen. It has to be intentional. This is just a quick little comment. We can extract value, we can arrest disorder. So extract value is where we are at, pulling resources out of the earth or pulling resources from each of you. Oh, you're really smart. I want to learn from you. That's extracting value. Arresting disorder is slowing down the damage, is what we do with our green building rating systems. We're making things more efficient. Do good sounds great. Sounds like it's great to do good, but do good is judgmental in nature. And if you've ever done international development, I'm going to come to your country and do good. And we actually are destructive. This is what I think that one guy was talking about with what the Dalai Lama was saying. Better to leave it alone. Don't assume that you're doing good. But evolving capability with the people and with the ecosystem in that place is our role. So I want to make that distinction between doing good and evolving capability. Does that make sense, folks?
For me, it makes totally sense because people common sense that change the world. I always say, don't change the world. Contribute to evolution of the world. So
and change yourself first.
Yes.
Or, you know what, or together, right? Because it happens together. So I think I'm just about done, Liliana. We need to end in, 9 minutes, right? Buildings, this came to me, this is not something that we thought about, but buildings and infrastructure projects are actually one of the most powerful ways to change the planet, because buildings and infrastructure projects actually can take years. So politics, you're lucky if you get 2 to 3 good years out of a politician. You're lucky if you get that. NGOs, they're always struggling, looking for money. They may come and go 5, 7 years. Of course, agriculture lasts forever, and business can too. So these are other really important leverage points. But building projects are engaged in a place, and infrastructure projects are engaged in a place over 15, the big ones, from 15 to 25 years. This gives us staying power to actually build the capacity in the community to transform. This is a project we just a few weeks ago, we got this announcement. We've been working on a $4 billion wastewater treatment plant in Vancouver, and the wastewater treatment plant is right there. But what we did is we said, folks, this wastewater treatment plant isn't going to mean anything without us taking care of the health of the ecosystem. And the Fraser River is one of the greatest salmon rivers in the world. So we developed, along with the wastewater treatment plant, new relationships with Musqueam people and 20 recommended ecological projects. What we just heard about is Metro Vancouver has agreed to proceed with those 20 projects. It took 2 years of holding that space for those projects to emerge as being important, and now they are considered equally important to the wastewater treatment plant. That's a 2-year transformation, folks. So that's what can happen when we engage people with intentionality of potential. So for architects, you have a lot more work in front of you now if you want it. Not just your project, but the community and watershed and the effect in the world. So expand your place. How big is here? So to finish up, I think I'm done here. Let's just do this little thought experiment. Imagine designing or purchasing a home. Let's call that designing a home or a bedroom addition for your growing family. Even if you don't have kids, I think you can imagine this. So what would you have to do to achieve this objective? Quick, I know it's patronizing because this is obvious, but what would you have to do?
Quick. Find a place.
Yeah, well, what else? Quick.
Look at the community around it.
What's that, Sean?
Look at the community around.
Well, you're way ahead of the game, so hold that thought. Yes, you want to do that, but if you're going to build a bedroom addition, you're going to hire the architect, you're going to hire a builder, you're going to get money, financing. If you don't get to find the money from your relatives, you may talk to your kids about what they want. So now, the reason I share that is because this next question is more important. Now, imagine designing a bedroom addition for the purpose of developing your children. What's required of us to realize this?
According to what we've just heard, maybe a notion of the potential. What do we understand as the potential development of our children?
Mm-hmm.
What we want to achieve, actually.
We might answer these questions too. Did something shift in you when I asked this second question? Did you feel the shift of moving from an object to our role as humans? And so the first time I ever did this was with a group of 500 people, and a guy stood up in the front row. It was the first reflection about this question, and he said, I realized I'm pretty screwed up. And we said, whoa, what do we have here? We're in trouble. And everybody reacted that way. Oh my goodness, what is this guy? And he said, get over yourself. He said, we're all screwed up. And he said, what I realized is that for me to develop my children requires me to understand who I am, which is profound, right? So, and of course, then you say, well, what's the nature of our family? Are we actually working on developing our children? Maybe we need to be in better relationship with each other. Maybe we need to move our house to a woods if we want our children to explore nature. Or maybe I need to move to New York City if I want my children to be street smart, right? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. But what is important is how are we thinking about myself, our family, and the larger system that we're part of to build the potential of our children. And that is no different, folks, if you haven't got it. That is no different than we're doing with our communities. And by the way, this is the way we will have massive change on the planet. It isn't going to happen. It's going to happen in multiple ways. But the long-lasting change will happen when we actually make every project, every profession, every job we do a value-adding process to self, group, and the system. Whether you're a lawyer or an accountant or a sustainability consultant, we all have this role. How do we contribute and add value to the larger system? What does that require of my organization? And what does it require of me? And this is where organizational development, we all know about organizational development practitioners. That's what they could be working on. We all know about self-actualization, Tony Robbins and all these people, self-help books, right? So we have self-actualization, group actualization. What we need to be adding is system actualization. The dynamic health of the system. That's the whole. And by the way, self and group actualization don't mean much if we're not serving something larger than we are. That's what we feel regeneration asks of us, folks. And so to sum up, that's it. Here's some takeaway actions for you. Number one, your project is not the project. The project is the system. Your project is going to be an outcome of that system. You don't start with the project, you start with the system. So then you understand the potential for health in each place. That's the system. You seek to add value or better evolutionary capacity to that place. You integrate stakeholders to serve that, and then you inform the project. So all these steps happen before the project gets informed. And by the way, the project will be a lot more successful. It will come in faster. It will be lower budget, and the community will love you. Speaking from an architect and developer standpoint. And then you engage in ongoing community practice, 3 to 5 years, well, of course, forever. And we are working with developers. Now you think, who's going to do that? Even in the United States, we have developers. We have 3 gigantic firms who actually build that capacity into their developments. And what they're doing, their exit strategy now is not just selling out to make more money. Their exit strategy, because they make a lot of money, their exit strategy is to have the community earn the buildings back. So the community buys the buildings back from the developer at the end, which is really cool. So people are thinking this way. There's hope out there. And I think that's probably all I need to say. There's a lot more to say, of course. There's a couple of our books. You're welcome to take a screenshot of that and contact us anytime you want. All right, I'm done.
Much. But I have a question for you.
Sure.
Even if we are just on time, I don't want to leave us without asking this question to you.
Sure.
Actually, we are, the Sustainable Development Goals. If you could define the 2050, the Sustainable Development Goals, how you define it, what actually could be those goals? Because in my vision, I see them as very separate again. How could it work it out using the collective vision to make it in another way, in your perspective?
Yeah. So we're doing a project right now in Ghana where we are achieving all 17 SDGs. And the reason we're achieving all 17 SDGs is because we aren't starting with the SDGs. We're starting with the potential of the place. If you start with the SDGs, you're going to get lucky to get 2 or 3. So I'm happy that the SDGs are there as metrics. It's how you work with them is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't work with them. They're a metric. If you aim at a metric, you're in trouble. What we need to be aiming at is the health and the coevolutionary relationship of this whole system. You will automatically get all 17 SDGs if you do that.
Wow. Thank you so much, Bill. I really appreciated you all being here. It just end our time on the conference. Actually, even though I'm here and we are here since 8:30 in the morning, 12 hours ahead, I could listen to you all night long, mostly, because I love when you are talking. So thank you so much for being here, but we have to end somehow. And also thank you to Sharon, to Renko, to all the team of Amarna Vida. It was such a great topic. I'm very honored, and I think I'm talking in name of as one, in name of all that were part of it. Sorry, I'm tired a little bit, so maybe I miss language. But really, what I gained from today, I will have it in my heart until the end of my life, even though my life continues in such a way, in many ways. And actually, I had to thank you because this gives me more strength to really believe that in the mission that we are doing and embracing you all and also helping to do it. So thank you so much once again to you all. I'm very honored. I think I'm talking in the name of all and hope to see you soon. And that's it. If someone wants to share something, go ahead, say goodbye, whatever.
Maybe one question or two, just short.
Yeah, happy to hang around.
Yeah, just how we can cooperate, because we have some very interesting projects that will be really benefit from this kind of experience you have in cities. We are working here in Croatia, in Split, Dubrovnik. How we can cooperate? Can we find a way how to make? And also, the second question is, can we have this material?
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome to have the slides, and there is so much more. I literally have hundreds and hundreds. But and yes, we're working. We have a big proposal in Hungary right now, and so yes, happy to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I can send a mail then to you, and then we can continue.
Please do.
Great. Wonderful. Super. That's all.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all this, but also to Liliana and all the team, because it was really great day. Very intensive, but very interesting, inspiring, productive. So thanks everyone, and of course Bill.
And any other questions? I'm happy to hang around if you want, but poor Liliana needs to go to sleep. So.
Yeah, she's already sleeping, but.
All right. I'll say goodbye. Thanks.